Next, we're going to kind of segue into one of government's commitments, and the 25-year environment plan was the development of Nature Recovery Network. Defra and Natural England are bringing together partners, legislation, funding to create the Nature Recovery Network to restore and enhance England's wildlife-rich places. So we're going to hear from Sebastien Lechanoine from Defra and Chris Davis from Natural England, give us an update on that development, including the policy and delivery elements. Not sure who's going to start. Over to you, Seb or Chris.
Yep, that's great. Thanks, Paul. And afternoon, everyone. Me and Chris will be doing a bit of a double act, with Chris coming in a bit in the later part of my presentation. But thanks very much for having me over this afternoon. It's a really great pleasure to be here today, and it's really good to hear Craig's thoughts as well, and some really quite inspiring thoughts on what we need to do here in the next few years for the position that we're in with climate and both nature. Well, I've got a few slides which I'll pull up quite shortly. For anyone who haven't met before, I'm Seb, and I work within Defra's National Biodiversity Division, and I look after some of the policy and delivery mechanisms within Defra for delivering the Nature Recovery Network. And we work really closely with Natural England on that, and Chris is kind of my counterpart at Natural England who manages some of the partnership work through there. So I'll let him introduce himself before we kick off. Chris, did you want to come in? You're on mute, Chris.
That helps, doesn't it? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Davis. I work in Natural England as the Nature Recovery Network Partnership Manager, and I sit over a very small team in Natural England, driving forward the national partnership to support the delivery of the NRN, and work alongside our area colleagues, including Liam O'Reilly, I think is on the conference today as well, who is our regional NRN partnership contact.
Lovely. Thanks, Chris. Paul, can everyone see my screen? I've shared it. With these online conferences, it's like that sometimes.
I can see it from here, so that's a good sign, Seb.
Fantastic. Yeah, please do interrupt me if other participants can't see it or anything. But I've got a few slides. Yeah, afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for having me over today. We've done the introductions. What I'm hoping to offer a little bit here is a bit more of a high-level view, I suppose, of government's plans to deliver a nature recovery network. And it is quite high level and quite a national level at the moment, but I think it certainly has some local relevance, and I'm really looking forward to any questions or conversations that come through from it. I think, for starters, it's worth just mentioning what actually is the Nature Recovery Network. And it's a commitment in our 25-year environment plan, essentially, to expand, improve, and connect, essentially, our network of habitats, wildlife-rich places across England. And so we've set up a whole range of policies, and the idea is that the outcome of all those policies coming together will grow the amount of habitat that we have, it will improve the quality of that habitat that we have, and it'll connect them as well, crucially, which we know is increasingly important for for species recovery and for all the other kind of host of nature-based solutions and other benefits you can get from it. The network will be made up of, the way we envisage it, existing protected sites, of our current suite of protected sites. They will form the core of the network. And what we're doing via our plans is to create new or improved wildlife-rich habitat outside of these protected sites that will either in and of itself make a significant contribution to the network if we're able to restore it a significant size and a sufficient quality as well for it to give the benefits to biodiversity you'd have without, or help connect the network. So I think the diagram on the right is a massive simplification of that, but just to kind of give you an idea of what it could be looking like. We've got your core areas. You've got that restoration area up at the top, and that's the kind of areas we'd hope would eventually make a significant contribution to the network in terms of the size and the quality of the habitats created there. And then you've got various ways of actually connecting that habitat. So I'm brutally simplifying this from an ecological perspective, but you've got different ways of doing it. That could be through a landscape corridor. You could have more linear corridor for certain species. And then you've also got what we're kind of terming stepping stones at the moment, which are those kind of more dispersed patches of habitat which can help certain species move. So, I mean, I think that's a complicated way of saying birds can fly, so they can fly between habitats, but certain species can't fly and will need their own various ways of connecting. It's very locally specific. It will vary depending according to which species, etc. But we're trying to get an approach that will enable us to capture kind of a whole level view of all that. In terms of why we need it, I think it's just quite helpful to take a step back and see why governments suggested to do this policy of a nature recovery network, essentially, that this outcome of all our policies, which will give better places for nature. It kind of stems from Sir John Lawton's review back in 2010, which, to simplify, the key takeout, I think, from that one for me is that the loss and fragmentation of habitats was the key driver of species loss and biodiversity loss, and also of all the other kind of win-win benefits that Craig was mentioning that you get when you lose biodiversity. And in a nutshell, the key expert evidence, suggestions from that is that to reverse that, we need more habitat overall. Where we can, that habitat needs to be in bigger patches around it together. That quality of habitat has got to be better overall across different parts of the network, but also crucially, and I've mentioned this quite a lot, it's that connectivity aim, that connectivity between the patches, and achieving that at a national scale is we put certain policies in place to make that happen. And I think just to illustrate that, quite brutally, simplified in a simple fashion, this is a map from Natural England's open data source, which, and the areas in blue shaded, some of you on this call will probably be familiar with, are the existing SSIs within the area. This is a brutal simplification because we know there'll be other areas of possibly wildlife-rich habitat, within this. But I think what does illustrate quite well is how our current, suite of protected sites are somewhat isolated. Some of them perhaps not big enough, etc. And so this is I think this is the idea behind the network, to kind of grow the habitat around these protected areas and also outside of these protected areas in new places, and try and link them up more. But I think an illustration kind of helps bring that to life a little bit sometimes. And we've got quite a broad set of objectives of what we're trying to do with the nature recovery network. So it's going to benefit wildlife. So some of our kind of main objectives at the moment by 2042 is to restore 75% of our protected sites, that's including freshwaters, to favourable condition. And as well as that, we want to create or restore 500,000 hectares of habitat outside of this protected areas. And that's, again, to come back to this, more, bigger, better, joined up principles. That's going to have some benefits for species. We want to recover, we want to recover species. We'll soon have targets by the Environment Bill, kind of, which are legally binding towards that. But there's benefits to people, but there's also much wider benefits. And this is kind of echoing some of the comments Craig were making, perhaps a little bit. But by having biodiversity working together in that linkage, we're able to deliver much wider environmental benefits as well, and also economic. So much better carbon capture, some more better flood management, but also really importantly, we know the benefits that access to nature brings to both mental and physical health, and by expanding the amount of wildlife-rich habitat out there and nature available to people, we also want to bring it closer to people, to where they live, to where they work, and that's a really important angle that we're not forgetting as well, to help provide that access benefits to people as well. So we've got a really broad set of objectives of what we're trying to achieve here, and to put that in place, we've got kind of three broad overarching pillars, if you want, and there's many different policies within that, but what we've put in place to deliver this nature recovery network is we've got some spatial planning policies, we've got funding and incentives, and we've got that all-important element, which I'm really glad Craig mentioned as well in his speech, was partnerships. And I think it's really important to remember that all of these need to work in lockstep together, essentially, if we're to achieve the ambitions we want to get here. There's a huge scale of change. It's really quite an exciting time, but I think none of us are ignoring the challenge that also does lie ahead here, and the importance of these three pillars working together. So I'm going to talk through the two first ones briefly, and then I'll pass on to Chris to talk a bit more about partnerships. So in terms of spatial planning, our key policy that we're putting in place for that and developing are the local nature recovery strategies. And so they're a new requirement in the Environment Bill. And what they're going to do at a very simple level is to essentially agree priorities for nature's recovery at kind of a region, a responsible authority scale, so roughly at a county level. They're going to agree the priorities for nature's recovery and the wider environment, but also the opportunities within that through a locally led process to identify essentially where is the best place to do this work based on the kind of local engagement process. So we're envisaging these to be a really helpful planning and targeting tool, and especially pushing that collaborative aspect. We know the importance of working with, with local stakeholders and of local stakeholders talking amongst themselves of what the key priorities are and what can be delivered, etc. But the idea for these is that they'll give us a really strong planning and also targeting tool for our resources and investment across the country. And we envisage roughly around 50 of them covering the whole of England. So we've got essentially that spatial framework for the network being planned through them, and also helping to kind of target those resources and investment. It's all very well to have opportunities and areas identified, but we also need funding incentives to make that happen, to enable the landowners and land managers to carry out those opportunities identified out of that. And within government, we're integrating the goals of the network into a really wide range of funding streams. And there's a lot of funding streams available out there at the moment for various types of nature recovery, woodland, peatland, etc. But I think some of the three main ones I just want to highlight today is we're working internally really hard to integrate the goals of the network in terms of making better habitat more joined up at a local level. We're working really hard to integrate that into our various schemes that reward environmental land management, which is kind of a step change almost in the amount of funding that will be available via agri-environment schemes for nature's recovery. We've got the Nature for Climate Fund as well, £640 million up to the end of this Parliament, 2025, to fund. That fund is more focused on trees and peat, given their strong carbon sequestration potential. But if that's done in a proper way, in an integrated way, that also does have benefits for habitats, for species, for biodiversity. And also, we're working really hard to get the goals of the network integrated into how biodiversity net gains can operate. So this is really exciting, because this is a kind of a way of leveraging in some private sector funding, which is also needed at a certain scale. And that's one of the requirements in the Environment Bill for any development to leave biodiversity in a 10% better state than it was. And that offers up some opportunities for for private funding to come into our nature recovery work. I think we do also see lots of parts of the network. If we're talking about recovering nature at a national scale, public money is really important, but we do also need to be thinking of how we're using private and voluntary sector resources. And this is really where kind of partnerships come into their own, to start identifying the different sources of funding available for the work we want to be doing. But I think what's really crucial, and we're still working really hard at working this out, is figuring out how this funding will need to join up at a local level. That's really important. From all the site visits that I've been lucky enough to go on and that stakeholders have shown me around, that's a really key bit. How do we use different funding sources at a local level, at a landscape scale, at the scale that we need to achieve projects that people want to do? And the details of that are still being worked through with us, of how that would link with LNRSs, etc. But we're working hard at it to really kind of facilitate that nature recovery, not just the building high level national blocks, but how that trickles down to a local level, which is really where the change happens and where it gets really interesting. And I think that tees us up quite nicely for Chris to bring us on to partnerships.
Thanks, Seb. No, I just sort of wanted to support what Seb was saying around the ambition around the Nature Recovery Network. I mean, it is an incredibly ambitious program of work that we probably have never seen before, and bringing together new mapping and new legislation, as well as the alignment of significant government funding and the integration of that funding within the prioritization, is something that we've been calling for a very long time, and it's amazing to see this being brought forward. I think the overall challenge is actually we always want to move faster and quicker, and actually this is incredibly complicated, and it's a long-term plan. So we've got 2042, 21-year program of work that's been committed to. The one thing which we know that we can't do to deliver this, we know that we need as many partners as possible to help with this process. We can have the best maps, we can have funding, but that's still not going to deliver the actual change on the ground. That will only be delivered by all the organisations that are on this call, as well as many others across the country. So we sort of done two key interventions to try and help this process, and we're still very early on. One is we've set up a national delivery partnership, and that very much brings together some of the key organisations, but is also open to everyone, and everyone we feel should be able, that's interested and able to support the objectives of the NRN, can join the partnership. And so far we have around 400 organisations that have signed up to supporting the NRN. And we also, to manage that, we have set up an oversight group, which is very much focused around having sectoral representatives as well as cross-government representatives on it. It's still early days, and you know, it's a key group which will need to help drive this nationally, but also we need to support local partnerships like yourselves, and we recognise that even having a national delivery partnership isn't actually going to result in change at a local level. We need both. We need a national coordination and local delivery. So the Humber partnership is going to be absolutely critical going forward to the delivery of the network. And we need all the organisations through and all these local partnerships across the country to come together to support delivery of the network. I really feel that, you know, this is an unbelievable opportunity, but equally we're at this very difficult stage within the process. We're only a few years into the policy, and we are just hopefully getting the legislation passed soon. I think the next couple of years are going to be quite a challenging period, where we start to produce the local nature recovery strategies, start to get and test the alignment of the different funding. But at the same time, there is still a drive to get on and deliver at the same time. So we're going to be doing this planning, trying to secure more funding, as well as having this urgency around the delivery, because we can't just wait for the plans to be in place. We need to pursue and get on with as much delivery on the ground as we can. And Natural England is investing that through our NRN contacts within the region, as I mentioned at the start, and we're also putting new funding into some local projects to try and kickstart this process of supporting action on the ground. And I'll leave that there. Thank you. Back to you, Seb.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and I'd just like to echo what's Chris saying. I think I completely agree on the scale of the challenge we need here, and just on the importance of the collaboration, and really welcome people's views and how we work together at local level to make this ambition happen. Just conscious, I'm almost done, Paul. I think one thing to. I think just one thing to leave us on, which I quite like to remind myself of to illustrate the scale of the challenge sometimes. This is taken at Longshore in the Peak District, which I went for a visit on with some of the NRN advisors that Chris just mentioned there. This is what I'm told 200 to roughly 200 to 300 hectares looks like. I like to take a step back and think that, you know, the government ambition here is for 500,000 hectares outside of protected sites here. So it's a big challenge. I'm really I think it's an exciting time. There's definitely some challenges ahead, both at national, regional and local level, but you know, I really look forward to engaging with you all and the conference day on this journey to really scale up nature recovery across the country and deliver what we need. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Seb and Chris. You know, real clear policy there, and focus on the delivery. I really like that point, Chris, about getting down to the action, and a very clever use of geography or an image of a landscape as to what the scale of the opportunity and challenge is. So great, thank you both very much for that.